During this time of a global pandemic, of unprecedented time of uncertainty, there are a lot of people who are finding themselves unemployed.
And we've seen this before with other oil and gas downturns where people want to stay in Tulsa. And this is a unique opportunity for people who have come out of maybe a long-term career and are really thinking about what do they want to be in their next phase? What do they want to turn into? What is their next step?
And so there are a lot of people who are right now at this moment needing to figure out a way to pivot, to be able to help continue to provide for themselves and their families. And entrepreneurialism is going to be a critical part of us moving forward.
And so a lot of times that means starting a small business and think about what they do well or what they enjoy or what they've always wanted to do. But now suddenly have the time on their hands to do it.
Data shows that major growth after any major disruption comes from small business, right? And the fact of the recession of 2008 showed that while large companies in the United States actually contracted jobs, all the new job growth came from small business and new businesses that didn't even exist before then.
People are going to be able to now really explore their passion and their purpose, and will need the knowledge, the capital, the network to be able to be successful.
For us in New Bedford, we see this as a huge opportunity to not only support small business, but now to have a structure in place, a partnership network of connectivity to give those small businesses more resources than they thought were even possible, to help them get going, a strong network to interconnect with other entrepreneurs. We're excited about that, and we know that small business and startups is the perfect place to start.
It can be a pretty scary time, not just because the economy is changing, but people find them in a new space. But anytime people step into starting a new business, it can be terrifying. And bring up that level of knowledge for folks so that they feel confident in what they're about to step into is a really important part of what the city's trying to do at this time.
And what we're really trying to focus on around equity and inclusion requires really hard work dismantling some systems that have occurred for a long, long time. And so having a network of people that are creative and like-minded and driven and I really feel like that system and the partners that were involved, all of that together has, I think, allowed us to help change the way America in particular looks at entrepreneurship.
People are going to be able to now really explore their passion and their purpose, and will need the knowledge, the capital, the network to be able to be successful. And I believe the commitment program provides all of those opportunities.
And it really just changing the way I thought about supporting businesses in our city.
To be able to cultivate, nourish, and kind of support and cheer on entrepreneurs within our communities, because they are the backbone of really our local economy. Local businesses, entrepreneurs stay with us through good and bad, and we want to make sure that we're there for them during this critical time.
Hello, and welcome to the 9th Annual Mayor's Conference on Entrepreneurship. Obviously, this year is much different than years past. We can't be with each other, we can't commiserate, we can't break bread together. You are more than likely very tired and worn out, feeling both the focus of blame and helpless to stop the worst from happening to your communities. Yet this too shall pass. Common phrase, almost trite. But it is a comfort to know that we can survive what we cannot control. However, impermanence does not belong solely to difficult times. All things, good and bad, must pass. And despite the inevitability of endings, we grow fearful. We feel the end of something near, and so we grasp to preserve. We strain to protect against what cannot be stopped. We forget ourselves. So much pain is caused not by the ending, but by the fear. And yet we founded our country on the principle, whenever any form of government becomes destructive to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute a new government. And this we have done time and again. As colonists, we ended our subjugation to a distant monarchy indifferent to local realities. Less than a decade into America's existence, we ended our country and built a new constitution. We fought brother against brother to end the institution of slavery, and the descendants of those enslaved people have fought for generation upon generation for an altered and more equitable government, an end to racism. Women of all backgrounds have fought for full recognition and enfranchisement. People of diverse sexual orientations and genders fought for us to see them and accept them, ending our blindness. In the pursuit of happiness, our brothers and sisters have ended many things, and often while threatened by the deep fear of change. But as Americans, we must not fear the end, because it means we have found the new. We are best at the frontier. Where others may hesitate, we, a nation of explorers from our earliest indigenous roots, push forward. Where others might see imperfections as an affront to their greatness, Americans see those imperfections as an opportunity to be greater. This spirit is exemplified in our entrepreneurs. In towns and cities across the country, entrepreneurs are creating something new. Entrepreneurs are untethered by the past. They are unafraid of the end and clear-eyed about the opportunity it presents. Entrepreneurs do not merely use creative destruction, they thrive on it. And so too does America. Remember, the greatness of America lies not in being more enlightened than any other nation, but rather in her ability to repair her faults. America is not her past sins or triumphs, or history or long-held traditions. America is an aspiration held by people, and anything that frustrates the dreams of our brothers and sisters must end. We are guided not by storied institutions, but by a philosophy, a spirit. And that spirit will exist so long as we are unafraid to embrace what it means to live by our own convictions. This too shall pass. But what is next is up to us. There are those of us already building the new. Will you join them? Will you work with them? That is really what this conference is about. Remembering that we must constantly improve, and change is not to be feared, but embraced. We all should be a little more entrepreneurial. And with that, I'd like to introduce to you all Mayor Quentin Lucas of Kansas City, Missouri. Mayor Lucas has been mayor just over a year now, and like many of you, has guided Kansas City through some very difficult times and done it well. But during that time, he's also been able to pass some important pieces of legislation and policy. He's gotten a zero fare ordinance for public transit through. He's eliminated municipal convictions for marijuana possessions. And he's made some tough choices to make sure that this city is ready for a rebound. Please help me welcome Mayor Quentin Lucas. Mayor Lucas.
Well, thank you all so very much. It is so exciting to have you virtually in Kansas City. When I got elected mayor, I knew one of the greatest things that I would get to do is interact with and engage, not just with the Kauffman Foundation, but with all of you. And I didn't think that that engagement would be from my living room in front of abstract art. So I hope we have a chance to meet each other in person one of these days. But as our last speaker noted, we are going through trying times. But these are no different than the times that so many of our communities, so many of our businesses, so many of our families have faced generation after generation. And we've come out often for the better. I look forward to learning more at this conference and learning more from all of you about how growth and prosperity can be supported and sustained by responsible local government. I look forward to learning from all of you how we can come up with the policies and the priorities that look to build a better Kansas City and a better America, not just during the trying times of 2020 or 2021, but for decades in the future. And fundamentally, I look for us to see how everything we're discussing relates to bringing us together on a racial, gender, and every other basis that we know sometimes divides us. I'm a new mayor, still comparatively, although 13 months starts to feel like 13 years in 2020. But nevertheless, I'm one who has been so blessed to build relationships like those with a foundation and with those of you who have cared so much to reach out. But I'm also blessed because I know that our community, all of our communities, are interested in looking towards a future. So although I can't offer you Kansas City barbecue today, I will encourage you to root for the Kansas City Chiefs, get some knowledge from your time here, and I hope we all can be in touch in the future, knowing that, as we just heard, this too shall pass, and we shall see brighter days ahead. Thank you. God bless you. And thanks for coming even virtually to Kansas City.
Thank you, Mayor Lucas, for your words and for your guidance. Now I'd like to introduce somebody very important to our work here and important to entrepreneurs across the country, the CEO of the Kauffman Foundation, Wendy Gillis. Wendy, like all good leaders, is compassionate, focused, willing to be objective and honest, and quite frankly, really funny. I've learned so much from her and am thankful to work at the foundation while she has been CEO. Wendy Gillis, everyone.
Thank you, Evan, and good morning, everyone. I really wish we could be together in Kansas City, but I'm still really excited to officially welcome you to the Kauffman Foundation's Mayor's Conference on Entrepreneurship. First, I just want to say thank you. I can't imagine what your day-to-day is like, dealing with COVID and racial injustice. I know the mayor's office is often the first call, whether it's your problem or not. So I just want to say how much we appreciate you being here with us as we think together how we can rebuild better through an entrepreneur-focused economic development approach. I'll say a little more about that later, but first I want to share some insights about Mr. Kauffman. Ewing Kauffman, the donor of our foundation, was a great entrepreneur who was practical, centered, and resilient. Mr. Kauffman was a Missouri farm boy who grew up poor but died a billionaire. He founded a major pharmaceutical company called Marion Laboratories, which years later is now merged into a much larger firm. He also founded the Kansas City Royals, which won a World Series in 1985 on his watch. So that's a little bit about who Mr. Kauffman was, but what did he believe? His principles still guide us today. He believed that everyone deserves a shot at success, regardless of race, income, or background. He believed that we can fundamentally change the outcomes of people's lives by tackling root causes, not just treating symptoms. That education is paramount in helping people to reach their full potential. That building enterprise is one of the most effective ways to realize individual promise and spur the economy. And finally, he believed that common people, just like himself, could do uncommon things. Our communities, our country, and our world are full of common men and women who are capable of doing uncommon things to create a better future. And we're going to need them to do it, because if there was ever a time to be in common, this is it. I'll outline a few challenges we see ahead and how the Kauffman Foundation is trying to address them. First, a few economic statistics that you might find interesting. So while big established firms employ the most people, studies by Firm H show that in the aggregate, most all new net job creation comes from firms less than 5 years old. And then when you think about how important startups are to bringing new ideas to market, new products and services and technologies, you begin to realize how much we depend on entrepreneurs. COVID-19 did not destroy a golden age of entrepreneurship. Unfortunately, we had a problem even before the pandemic. By the indicators we track at the Kauffman Foundation, such as new business starts, American entrepreneurship has been in a slump or essentially flat for about 2 decades. In addition, first-year job creation by startups averages about 5.27 jobs per 1,000 adults nationally. But back in the late 1990s, that number was around 8 jobs per 1,000. So the takeaway here is that fewer companies are starting and they're employing fewer people. Now, I wish I had the answer to why we're in this long-term slump. I don't. But through our research and experience at the foundation, we can point to a few problem areas that are contributing factors. One is that we just have an uneven playing field. Entrepreneurs face barriers that are much higher than larger established companies. In addition, women, people of color, and Americans living in rural communities face higher barriers and often don't have the access to the kind of resources and connections they need to get their businesses off the ground. Second, we add a pandemic and an economic crisis into the mix, and now we have new and small companies at extreme risk. We're seeing these even more so with businesses run by people of color, by women, and again, by those living in rural America. It's been reported that almost 40% of Black-owned businesses have closed so far during the pandemic. A third problem is that in both the short and long term, we have a talent pipeline issue. Our education systems simply aren't well aligned to support what our students need now and in the future. Unfortunately, the majority of students aren't even completing 1 year of college. Now, that's not good for them, That's not good for higher education, and it's certainly not good for our workforce. Ultimately, our education systems need to provide more choices and more options for students to be prepared for the real world. So in this time of crisis, we need to change systems and rebuild better. We know that just stabilizing the economy is the most important step right now, but then what? To rebuild better, we believe we need a new ecosystem of entrepreneurship that's more inclusive and equitable, and new learning pathways for students that meet the challenges of today and tomorrow. For us at the foundation, rebuilding better means being really clear about what we stand for. You can see our vision and our mission, and our 3 priorities: inclusive prosperity, prepared workforce, and entrepreneur-focused economic development. To make those priorities more real, I thought I'd share a few stories. Like the story of Chris Evans. Chris is the founder and president of T-Shirt King, a successful business. But as a Black entrepreneur, he told us that despite his success, he had trouble finding traditional lines of credit. He's not alone. In 2019, 57% of Black people who applied for credit were denied or approved for less than requested, versus 24% of white people. Most business starts, as we know, are financed by personal credit, personal savings, and bank loans. The Brookings Institution found that Black household net worth was about $17,000 on average, roughly 10% of the net worth of the average white household. We worked with the CDFI in Kansas City to produce a loan fund that's focused on these problems. But more needs to be done for true systems change so that more entrepreneurs like Chris have a level playing field so they can realize their entrepreneurial dreams, create jobs, and build wealth. That's what we mean by inclusive prosperity. There's also the story of Leyland, a student from the Shawnee Mission School District, one of our suburban school districts here in Kansas City that's rapidly diversifying. She obtained an internship at a lab at the University of Kansas Medical Center. She told us that that internship gave her hands-on practical experience in a professional setting. She also noted that she developed interpersonal skills and relationship building techniques that made her a better all-around student and also ready for the workforce when she graduates. So when we talk about a prepared workforce, we want all students to have those real-world experiences just like Leyland. Finally is the story of Brandy Bynum Dawson, an entrepreneurship supporter. She tells the story of growing up in the northeastern part of North Carolina. She remembers the local businesses that no longer exist. She says, and I quote, "With the loss of those businesses goes a loss of memory, as well as a sense of belonging, a sense of pride, and a sense of hope. We want to be able to turn that around. Growing your own businesses in your communities. That's what we mean by our 3rd priority, entrepreneur-focused economic development. All 3 of these priorities demand strategies that make changes to policies, practices, and procedures. I'm going to highlight just one strategy that's focused on policy change. Last October, the Kauffman Foundation launched America's New Business Plan, a bipartisan policy roadmap with recommendations for federal, state, and local government. I'm not going to go into the full plan today, but I did want to give you a flavor for it because it touches on all the foundation's work. The plan highlights both short and long-term steps needed to stabilize entrepreneurship now and help it to grow more equitably in the future. It contains 4 pillars. First is funding. At least 83% of entrepreneurs don't access either venture capital or bank loans at the time of startup. We need to create equal access to the right kind of capital that serves more entrepreneurs. Second is opportunity. New and small businesses simply don't have the same resources that big established firms do to navigate complex regulations. We need to level the playing field and and cut the red tape that holds too many entrepreneurs back. Third is knowledge. Many entrepreneurs don't have the kind of skills they need, or they weren't taught how they need to run a business in their formal education training. So we need to provide more education, more know-how, so that entrepreneurs can be successful. The 4th is support. Becoming an entrepreneur is an act of courage, but it feels like it's out of reach for too many people. So we need a stronger safety net that encourages more entrepreneurial risk-taking. I'll end where I started, with some wise words of our founder. The Kauffman Foundation can't do this work alone. Our money can't do it alone, nor can philanthropy in general. The issues we face are far too big for any one organization or sector. We need to work alongside businesses, alongside education institutions, and with community leaders like you. You're in your role to build stronger communities. And if we're going to rebuild an economy and society that's more equitable and more inclusive, the work you do is absolutely critical. So thank you so much for your support of entrepreneurship. And again, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Wendy, for that incredible presentation. If you would like to see Wendy's slide deck, it will be made available to you in the file section of the agenda. So if you look up where you were watching the video, you'll see chat, and over a few tabs, you'll see files. It will be there, and you can take it and download it and use it for your own purposes. I would also like to touch base on America's New Business Plan. You will notice that all the programs, policies, and practices that you have committed to today fall in the 4 categories of America's New Business Plan. So in your own way, you are helping promote this policy platform on the grassroots level in your towns and cities across America. So thank you for that. Now I'd like to introduce our collaborator, National League of Cities. The National League of Cities is such an important piece of this conference and this program because they are the ones providing the technical assistance to help you succeed in your implementation of a program, policy, or practice. And of course, now I'd like to introduce Clarence Anthony, the CEO of NLC. Clarence is a former mayor. He is generous with his spirit and his energy. He cares deeply for cities and the people that serve them, you all. I am grateful for Clarence and the National League of Cities. And so Clarence, take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Clarence Anthony, CEO and Executive Director of the National League of Cities. I am honored to welcome you to the 9th Annual Mayor's Conference hosted by the Kauffman Foundation. This is the 3rd year NLC is participating with Kauffman on this conference. We're so pleased to be able to work with the Kauffman Foundation to support city leaders who are prioritizing entrepreneurship and small business ownership. Here at NLC, we are committed to supporting local leaders like you by offering technical assistance, sharing practices for addressing the challenges you are facing, and partnering with organizations like Kauffman, as well as the private sector, to bring you resources you need. This conference comes at a crucial time. Our nation is at a crossroad. Mayors are facing unprecedented challenges. You've been on the front lines responding to this health pandemic, and now face a fast-moving economic recession and social uprising in many of your cities. Your work over the next 2 days to learn how you can support small businesses and entrepreneurs in your cities and towns is vitally important. Along with Kauffman, NLC is here to help you think differently and adopt innovative strategies for strengthening the small businesses in your community. As our nation looks to rebuild, we can reimagine our systems and institutions. This includes how we support Black and minority-owned businesses who have historically been excluded and disproportionately impacted by racist policies and procedures. This conference is a great first step at learning how, as leaders, you can adopt and apply an equity lens to economic development and your work with small businesses. Over the next 2 days, I encourage you to learn as much as you can and know that NLC and the Kauffman Foundation are here to help you tackle the challenges you are facing. Lastly, I want to invite you to join us this year at NLC's City Summit, which will also be virtual. It is a great opportunity to connect with peers from across the country and advance your work on innovation and entrepreneurship. Enjoy the conference, and please don't hesitate to reach out to NLC if we can support your work. Have a great conference. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you, Clarence, for those words and your leadership. Now I'd like to introduce Jen Steinfeld. She is the director of the City Innovation Ecosystem Program. Jen recently joined NLC, transitioning from Mayor Lorza of Providence, Rhode Island, his staff. She, like you, worked on Mayor Lorza's commitment and felt so strongly of the impact, she decided to join the program. And by join, I mean make it a whole lot better. She and her team have taken a good idea and really formalized it. But more importantly, she has brought a calm professionalism to the work that has earned through years of fighting for the rights of others. I'm proud to call Jen my colleague and friend. Jen.
Well, thank you so much, Evan and Clarence, for that generous welcome. It is strange to not be with all of you in person, and it is also wonderful but challenging to be not on the front lines of city service. But I am so excited today to have so many cities joining us to work towards more robust, inclusive, and equitable local economies. The National League of Cities is so grateful to the Kauffman Foundation for making it possible for us to work with all of you. Municipal governments are in a unique position in doing this work, and at NLC, we are here to be a resource and an advocate for your cities and for you as individual leaders. Our work here today sets an important foundation for our collaborative work throughout the year. And so I just wanted to take a moment to go over our goals for the day. So today, we really want you to become more familiar with the commitment that your city is making to implement a policy practice to move towards a more equitable and inclusive economy. We want you to get excited about what the impact is going to be for your local entrepreneurs. And I know for me, this has been a really difficult time. And so having an opportunity to focus on hope and on building towards a better future really is inspiring to me. We want you to be able to communicate the program that you've taken on and the impact to your local constituents and to your partners. And we want you to meet other mayors and city staff that are taking the same journey as you. And finally, we want you to walk away feeling like you're more prepared to face the difficult times ahead. We're all in this together, and we're really looking forward to continuing our work together at the conference over the next 2 days and beyond. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for those words and your guidance over the next few months. Now we have our first panel. It's a multidisciplinary discussion on how the last 6 months have truly affected our communities and how you as local leaders might make decisions for different parts of your cities and towns. It is moderated by Betsy Hodges, the former mayor of Minneapolis and an expert on leading through disruption and supporting leaders to enact anti-racist systems of change. Betsy will be a fantastic moderator, and she is within a group of incredible panelists. And so I will let them take it from here and introduce themselves and run with the conversation. Betsy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Evan, and it is an honor to be here. Difficult and challenging times for mayors are something I'm familiar with, but I don't think anything has prepared us for these times. These are difficult times to be a mayor. These are difficult times to be in city service. With COVID, with the budget issues that you're facing, with issues of race, on top of America's perhaps most unusual president, if not most divisive. And the future is always uncertain. Just ask yourself 6 months ago whether the future was uncertain, and then ask yourself today. And I think we all know we don't necessarily know what's coming, and yet it's your job and our jobs as people who work in cities to do our best to prepare for what we can see, to do our best to serve constituents, and to find a path forward. But there's no roadmap for it. There's no roadmap for governing in these uncertain and difficult times. But today, what we'd like to do to really start things off is bring a crew of folks who may seem an unusual choice for a city's panel on, governing through uncertain times. It's an unusual, not unusual, but uncommon, perhaps, array of expertise on this panel. But all of them have something that will give you assistance as you are thinking about not just this crisis in the present moment, which I know you've been dealing with admirably and well, whether it feels like it or not. You've all been doing the level best you can in really difficult circumstances. And each one of these experts has a perspective you might not have yourself or might not even have on your staff, but who can light the way to what you might be facing in the next 6 months, the next 12 months, the next 18 months. What do we see as the domino effects of where we are now, and have some ideas about how to prepare for that, and things you can be doing now to set your city up well, to set your administration up well, and to set your constituents up well to face what is likely coming in the future. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a word or two about each panelist, and many thanks to the panelists now and throughout. One word or two about each panelist, and then I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves and say a few things, about 5 minutes each. And we'll have a couple of questions for the rest of the panel. If you have questions, please feel free to submit them. We'll be asking questions once they're done speaking. So the panelists are Karen Dynan, who is a professor of practice at Harvard University Department of Economics. And she, from 2014 to 2017, she was the Assistant Secretary of Economic Policy and Chief Economist at the US Department of Treasury. Then there will be Benjamin Schramm, who's an epidemiologist at the Division of Disease Control for North Dakota. Shout out to North Dakota. I'm from Minnesota myself. And then Lynn Bufka, who is a psychologist and Senior Director of Practice, Transformation, and Quality at the American Psychological Association. And then finally, Faye Horwit is president of Forward Cities, which works to equip communities and regions to grow and sustain a more equitable entrepreneurship ecosystem and a more equitable economic ecosystem for everyone. And so these are the four panelists. Again, much gratitude to you for being here and helping shine a little bit of light for us in these times. And we will turn it over to Karen.
Thanks, Betsy. It's really wonderful to be here. I'm going to share some slides. Okay, so hopefully my slides are showing. They are showing. Great, that's terrific. Okay, so I'm going to spend the next few minutes giving you my perspective on where the economy is and what that implies for our policy priorities. And to start off, this slide makes my first point, which is that the US economy is in recovery. And that's true pretty much everywhere. So this chart shows the change in consumer spending relative to pre-pandemic days. And the dark line is the path for the United States as a whole. As we all know, spending plunged in March as the economy shut down. It hit a low point in April, and since then has shown a substantial recovery. Now, the interesting thing is that if you look at the lighter gray lines, those are for states. And by the way, at the website that I got this data from, for which there's a link at the bottom of the page, it also has information about metro areas. So I encourage you to check it out if you're not using it already. But the striking thing about these gray lines is that while every state has a somewhat different path, there's also a good deal of similarity across states in the upward trend. So the takeaway is we're in recovery everywhere. Okay, that said, I have some caveats, and this slide offers the first one. So first of all, the recovery is only partial. I'm showing you here the level of non-farm payrolls through August, and you can see the nice bounce that occurred early on, representing millions and millions of people who are back at jobs. Okay, so that's great. Notwithstanding that progress, you can see that we are only partway out of the hole. To get back to where we were in February, we need 11.5 million more jobs. Next caveat, the pace of recovery is slowing. So this chart is showing you data that's hot off the presses. They're yesterday's retail sales numbers. And here I'm plotting the change in retail sales from month to month. And you can see that by far the biggest gains were in May and in June. Okay, we're still seeing increases, and by the standards of a normal economy, these would be decent increases, but they're much smaller than they were earlier in the summer. So the pace at which we're climbing out of the hole is getting much slower. We're entering, in other words, kind of the slog part of the recovery. And we're seeing this slowing not just in retail sales, but in lots and lots of indicators. The recovery is also, in my view, fragile. Okay, I think that's not surprising, and it's okay in some senses that it's slowing, but we really don't want it to falter. Okay, so one of the things that drove the rapid early recovery was an enormous amount of federal stimulus. And one of the big worries right now is whether we'll get more stimulus passed before we hit stall speed. And this is a graphic from the Congressional Budget Office, which basically describes the stimulus we've seen so far with the sizes of the boxes corresponding to the amount of money spent. And what you can see from this chart is that some of the big pieces, so the PPP program for small business and the supplementary unemployment benefits, which I've circled in orange, they have or they are expiring. And other important components like the checks, which is what I've circled in gold, they were one-off. And as I probably don't have to tell this audience, the aid that was designated for states and locality, which I've circled in this lighter blue color, it was just plain inadequate. Okay, so the fact that we haven't made progress towards spending another federal stimulus bill is one source of uncertainty that makes the economy fragile. So this brings me to my final caveat. I'm sorry, I went the wrong direction. And I think people probably know this one as well. It has been a really uneven recovery. So this slide shows patterns of employment rates for people at the top of the income distribution and people at the bottom. So the high wage workers greater than 60,000 a year, the low wage workers less than 27,000 per year. But if you look at that lighter blue line, what you can see is that basically employment rates have been restored for people in that high wage category. Okay, so they've seen what feels like, at least in terms of their employment rates, kind of a full recovery, but it's a very, very different story for people at the bottom. So this brings me to my policy priorities. This is my last slide, and then I'll stop talking. The first is actually not economic policy, it's public health policy. But in this episode, public health policy is an important part of economic policy. We cannot sustain a robust recovery if people won't go out and engage with the economy because they are afraid of the virus. So we need to protect public health. The second is to sustain businesses, not all businesses, but those businesses, and we have many, many of them that have long-term viability. Okay, so we can replace our existing economic structures with new ones if they go down. Okay, businesses can fail. Okay, but that's really costly to have a restaurant that in normal circumstances would be thriving, but because of the pandemic fails, then we have to replace it with an entirely new restaurant. Okay, it's costly to the economy. So what you need to do is we need to do what we can to keep struggling businesses going. And the third policy priority is to direct resources towards relieving hardship. Families at the lower end, as I showed you, they're suffering more now, okay? But they're also facing some big risks going forward. So for example, I think a lot of you are probably worried about a wave of evictions once the moratorium expires, okay? So these families need to be helped for their own sake, but it's also for everyone's sake, because I don't think you can have a robust recovery more broadly if these families are all wiped out. Okay, so that's what I have. I am going to stop sharing my slides now and turn things over to the next panelist.
And the next panelist will be Benjamin, our epidemiologist from North Dakota.
Thanks, Betsy. And I'll say quickly that I am a transplant from Minnesota. So nice to be a neighbor currently and formerly from your state. Thank you all for having me today. As an epidemiologist, during this COVID-19 pandemic, I've had the opportunity to work with state and local leaders, business owners, and community members to provide guidance as we all learn how to live with this new threat. As a state employee, I've seen how important it is to have strong local leaders like yourselves, and have sought to provide the data and knowledge necessary to support those communities. As we all look towards a future of moving back to normal, I want to encourage you all to embrace the science and data-backed ideas. It is important as we move forward to not forget about this era of struggle and loss, but to learn from it, grow from it, and become more resilient. Business owners, schools, and the community are all struggling as this pandemic presses on, and far too many doors have been closed permanently. We are all concerned about the physical, mental, and economic health of our communities. As we continuously assess and reassess the risk levels in our communities, we must weigh the balance of these physical, mental, and economic health factors to take the appropriate action for the unique community in which we live. If it is not readily available to you now, I encourage you to work with your state or regional health districts to ensure you have the level of data that you need to understand the current status of your community. Data can tell us who's getting sick, who's spreading the virus, and how we can take targeted actions to prevent these from occurring. Right now, we have the opportunity in our communities to encourage our citizens to take the actions needed to help bring us out of this health crisis. The science behind mask use is sound, and promoting mask acceptance is a critical element to stemming the tide of COVID-19. Regardless of political ideology, with or without state mandates, we can encourage our community to be accepting of the place masks have in our lives today. We must also begin preparing now for this upcoming vaccine season, not only for COVID-19, but also for influenza and the other viruses that have the potential to cause tremendous harm when left unchecked. The last thing we want this fall is the dual storm of a fierce flu season alongside COVID. It is important for our communities to hear from their local leaders about these vaccines, to be informed of when they'll be available, who should get them, and where they're coming from. It is important to allow avenues for discourse about any concerns our communities might have about these vaccines, and to be open and honest about the facts and science. Looking towards the future, I would like us to all envision how our communities might be different than they were just 9 months ago. What have we learned? What changes are here to stay? I think it's safe to say that we all want things to return to normal, but what will that normal look like? Will we return to a life full of handshakes and physical greetings, or will we shift to more verbal interactions that we're using today? Will the plexiglass shields come down, or will we continue to build them in our businesses moving forward? Will our office workers return to their office buildings, or will they continue to work from their homes? I don't think anybody has the answers to these questions today, but these are important considerations as we attempt to reshape our communities to come back stronger. Above all else, I hope that the things we learned and continue to learn about this pandemic lead us to a better tomorrow, to a future where we would be more prepared for something like this to occur. As the climate of our world continues to change, the threat of novel viruses like this continues to grow. I'm happy to see you all here working together to collaborate, to learn from each other, and to achieve a healthy and equitable recovery and growth that engages our communities, reduces poverty, and promotes public health and resilience. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. We appreciate that. The next presenter is Lynn Bufka, a psychologist from the APA.
Well, good morning, everybody. I am delighted to be here with my fellow panelists. We have a lot of common ideas that we are sharing. It's very evident already. I think it's so critical that we are speaking to you, to mayors, to mayor staffs, to the people who really have influence in local communities, because that is where change needs to happen, and the kinds of solutions that we need to move forward really have to be tailored to the local communities. We have to work in partnership with state and national governments, but local communities really are going to have significant importance to talk about what is happening at their level. So I think it's so critical that we're speaking with all of you today. I do have some slides that I'm going to share, and hopefully I will do it right. So I will make that switch right now and talk through those very quickly. And yes, that would be my boys' soccer team. My mother told me, don't stand next to Jesse, the really tall one, for future photos. Okay, so I'm quite familiar with stress. I'm a psychologist. I talk about stress and anxiety all the time. Stress is having a significant impact on our communities. And it's really critical that we think about it, what the impact is in the local communities. We know that individuals are having a variety of reactions to what is happening in our world right now. Stress is something we all experience. We absolutely need to experience it. Stress often motivates us to do the things that we need to do in order to protect ourselves, to take action, to move forward. But if we are feeling overwhelmed, if we are feeling too stressed, if we are feeling very anxious, that can actually impede our ability to cope, to manage what we are faced with, and to do the kinds of things that we need to do. So we have seen an increase in self-reported stress and anxiety symptoms since the public health emergency began. And it's important to recognize that that we're seeing this both in our own survey data that we have at APA. We also see it in survey data coming from other sources such as the CDC. We know that people are starting to say, we're seeing less stress reported in overall. We think this could be in part because people are just kind of getting used to it. Like, this is the way it is. They're habituating, so it doesn't feel as horrible. It just is becoming chronic stress that people are experiencing. But we're still seeing higher stress among certain segments of the population. Parents with children under the age of 18 at home. We're seeing it among ethnic and racial minorities who are facing not only the impact of COVID, which has significant disparities in terms of those communities, but also the very clear systemic racism that we're addressing in many aspects of our communities right now. So it's sort of a dual high-level stress. And we're also seeing those most negatively impacted by the pandemic having higher levels of stress. And by those folks, I mean people on the front lines, people who have lost jobs because of the pandemic, people who've lost family members who are struggling with that. And we're seeing a significant amount of grief and loss for everybody. We've had 200,000 people die with COVID. We have after effects of COVID. If you've had COVID, for some people, it's not as challenging a disease. For others, it is really leaves lingering after effects in terms of cognitive kinds of issues and other sorts of problems throughout the body. We're going to see lots of challenges with that. But for many people, there is just the loss of rituals. You can't mourn and gather to recognize a loved one who's died, whether it's from COVID or something else, the way that we used to. And those kinds of rituals are so critical. We've seen the struggles that kids have for not having had a prom, have the kind of graduation that they wanted. College students who maybe graduated in the spring and don't really know what to do next. Do you start graduate school when you're going to be doing it all remotely? Or how do you go out and find a job? And then the vast majority of workers, as Karen was talking about, who've had significant changes in their work status. Some who are teleworking and had to adjust to that. Some who've lost jobs, who've lost hours, changes in what people anticipated as their career. So lots of grief and loss in the population as well that I think it's important to pay attention to. And when we know that people are dealing with chronic stress, there's certain aspects of it that can impact us in ways beyond just the experience of feeling stressed. There's also the loneliness and isolation that individuals are experiencing as a result of the pandemic, because we are not gathering in the ways that we did prior to the start of the public health emergency. And that has implications both for our overall well-being and also how we are coping with the situation that we're in, because one of the critical things to do to cope with adversity is to have social support and social connection. And we've all had to figure out how to do that in an era where we're physically distancing. So it's a really challenging time right now. Chronic stress has an impact on us, both our mental and physical health. And I won't go into all the details because I have 5 minutes, but it can impact your musculoskeletal system. We all know about muscle tension and headaches. People can have elevated blood pressure. You can have GI symptoms. People can go on to develop depression, anxiety, significant mental health concerns. So if we don't deal with the stress and how people are coping with stress, we have these longer term implications for the overall health that people experience. Stress also interferes with our ability to process information and make decisions. Too much stress can make it harder for us to take in information. Right now, many people are making numerous novel decisions that they haven't had to make before. When we all knew, sort of, I get up at this time, I take the bus to work, I work in my office for these hours, I come home. Now it's I telework, my kids are doing class here at home. How do I manage that? How do I figure out, is it safe for me under whatever phase of opening your local community is for me to go do X, Y, or Z? We're making novel decisions. That's mentally taxing. That uses more of our cognitive resources and makes it harder for us to continue to process information and make those decisions as rapidly as we used to. The flip side of it is, though, some individuals may start to see the threat as being not so bad because perhaps it hasn't happened to them, or perhaps they've just adapted to the 6 months of what the public health emergency situation is, and life's going on. So I'm just not going to worry about the actual threat anymore. I've become somewhat heedless in responding to it. So we've got both those kinds of challenges happening right now in how individuals are processing information and responding to it and moving forward in the world. So for you, what does this mean? Obviously, you're going to be working on stabilizing social issues. You're going to be looking at what are the economic needs of your community, but you're also going to be looking at how do we address if there's problems with policing and questions being raised about policing in your communities, or questions being raised about disparities and racism in your communities. You're going to be working to stabilize those as well. It will be important to provide opportunities within your community to acknowledge the losses and changes. People need to have those kinds of opportunities to say, yes, things are different. This is not the way we thought it was going to be. Acknowledge that before sort of rushing into the next phase of what's happening. I also urge you to really take a population health approach to psychological well-being. Too often, mental and behavioral health sits in a completely different department and never talks to public health. Those offices need to be integrated because our minds and bodies are integrated. Our approach to overall population health needs to be integrated as well. So opportunities to get leadership from both sides of those offices to be working together to figure out how to move the community forward will be important. Overall, I think this pandemic has underscored how important it is that everybody needs support, and we need to further develop our ability to cope with adversity. In the end, I hope that will be one of the positive outcomes, that at the end of this will be like, my repertoire for handling tough stuff has really grown, but wow, in the middle of it, it's really hard. Opportunities in the local community to develop that will be really important. And some of those things will be ensuring that there's access to resources, access to traditional direct care, but also how do you bring resources that are valuable to the local community, whether it's engaging with schools, places of worship, places where people are, where they would normally gather, to ensure that you can support the overall psychological well-being as we move towards recovery. The other thing that I think it's critical for you to think about is how do you communicate? Right now, we are communicating under stress, and that communication has to be good communication. So since we know stress limits the processing of information, decision-making, it becomes even more important to be as clear and consistent and transparent in messaging as possible. Leaders will have to adapt how they communicate. Ensure that messengers are trusted messengers of the community. Partner with the groups, the organizations that people turn to in times of stress, whether it's principals, whether it's ministers, whoever is important in your community, to partner with them in the kinds of messages you want to convey to the local community about whether it's mask wearing, whether it's physical distancing, whether it's what you're working on to try to strengthen the economy. Find your partners and help them communicate with you on these issues. Try to tailor your messages to your audience and what's important to your audience. If you're trying to get behavior change around mask wearing, focus on the desired behavior. Don't spend so much time trying to shame people for what's not happening, but really focus on rewarding those who are doing well and getting the community to have disapproval for non-compliance around the kinds of behaviors that we need to support public health right now. We find that you don't want to repeat misinformation if you're trying to debunk it. Just sort of skip past repeating the misinformation and keep going with the accurate information, because people will remember the misinformation at the same time you're trying to debunk it. And really, we're trying to foster a sense of efficacy and the benefit for the community. When we talk about what's needed and we help people understand how important it is for the overall community, not just themselves, that often helps people support the messages of change and what we need to do and the directions we need to go in. So these are some brief ideas about how to communicate right now when we're under stress that can help you be more effective in how you get your messages across to your local communities. And that's all I have. I put a couple of websites up that we have at apa.org that has information specifically around mental health and well-being that could be useful to you. And I look forward to our continued conversation.
Thank you so much for that great information. Our final panelist to speak will be Faye Howitt from Forward Cities, talking about entrepreneurship and supporting diversity in these times.
Thank you. And I'll go ahead and share my screen. Really glad to be here with you all today. Forward Cities works, we place local entrepreneurial ecosystem builders in cities around the country, really focused on helping local stakeholders build more equity into how they serve entrepreneurs in their communities. And what I'm going to share with you today actually is a result of a lot of the things we've been hearing in real time during the pandemic from our local directors who do that work, and from the communities they serve, and from the entrepreneurs that they are there to benefit. So first, what we're seeing right now in this time is truly dual pandemics. One, COVID-19, and the other, racial injustice. Both of these things, affecting those that have already experienced and been marginalized up until this point, more so than others. And that's also leading to economic uncertainty across the board for many cities. So everyone right now is asking these questions. What should the cities do? What should our agencies do? And then personally, what should we do as individuals? And it's really important to think about the fact that cities are at a true crossroads right now. There is no clear end to the pandemic. There is no magic bullet for racism. And everyone is now trying to figure out, how do we fix it? How do we fix it? And at this point, there are only two places that we can go. We can go backwards to the status quo, or we can go towards something better. And the first thing we have to understand is, before we go and try and force a fix for either of these two things, we have to accept that we are all experiencing multi-layered and multifaceted trauma. And until we can deal with that trauma, we cannot effectively move forward together, and our cities cannot heal and cannot go on to what's next. So a trauma-informed approach is one that is administered in a way that realizes the widespread impact of trauma and understands how the path to recovery, that recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma on clients. And if we're thinking about this from, let's say you were having an individual trauma, this is the way that traumas are dealt with. And in addition, it responds by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into procedures and practices. And lastly, a trauma-informed approach seeks to actively resist re-traumatization. And so if you think about, this is the way we would approach trauma if it happened to an individual, we have to think about, what does that mean when trauma is actually experienced by entire communities, by cities, by an entire nation. And so one of the things we are seeing is that there's multiple traumas that are being experienced right now across the country and cities. Chronic trauma is the first, and it's typically repeated or prolonged and multi-layered. And so this pandemic is creating layered traumatic events. The closing of businesses, the loss of jobs, stock market plunging, educational childcare systems up in the air. All of this is exacerbated for more vulnerable communities. We're also experiencing a historical trauma, and that is one where collective trauma is experienced amongst a people group that impacts their role in society. And America has a pattern of historical trauma. with at least 4 people groups who have experienced historical trauma in different ways and in different places. Jewish Americans, recent immigrant refugee populations, indigenous populations, and the Black Americans have all experienced historical trauma related to their life either before coming to America or in America. Then there's complex trauma, which is an exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events over time, often at the hands of what should be a trusted party. So the enslavement of Black Americans is such a trauma, and it's created a cascading complex, and it's layered with re-traumatization over time that has extended the wounds of slavery far past the original event. And that is what we are seeing right now. It is deep-seated in who we are as a country, and we cannot disconnect from it. We can't pretend that it did not exist or that it is somehow over. And then the last is national trauma, which generally applies to the members of a collective group, such as a country or a well-defined group of people. And these are not experiences just one person experiences, or that one group of people experiences, but it's our entire country. We are all living through all of these traumas together, and we're actually there's a repeated trauma because we're hearing about it, talking about it, seeing it on TV, in social media. You know, it is ongoing and ever present in how we're functioning. And it can also breed division between various people groups within the nation. So if we're thinking about all these multi-layered traumas, it's really important that we do take a trauma-informed approach to how we move forward together as cities. So the first thing that we need to do is to realize, actively observe and acknowledge and accept that trauma is happening. We cannot deny it. We have to also avoid minimizing the traumas of others if they're different than ours. People groups that are more prone to their businesses closing because they are not tech enabled or they are not high tech. Recognize, see and consider that there's unique drama experienced by different people. And that means that recovery is going to be different for different people as well. So educate yourself on the lived experience of those that are different than we are. And then response. This is where it really comes to a head for cities and city leaders, is we have to consider how are we going to show up in response to these traumas. So integrating your emerging knowledge of what's happening into your policies, your procedures, and practices even within your staff, right? And then also how you're engaging with your communities. And adapt your economic development strategies to meet the current needs of communities and to meet entrepreneurs where they are, who are also experiencing all of these traumas. And lastly, this is the most important one. Be willing to think, behave, and act in a way that prevents re-traumatization during this time. So things like giving PPP to large companies that would have been fine without it, right? This is that type of re-traumatization that we have to avoid, and we have to avoid continuing these patterns that have led to where we are, and also lead into the leadership of people groups that have been disenfranchised. Hire Black businesses, hire Hispanic businesses, particularly to lead the recovery efforts, to put them out front, because we need to see, our communities need to see that. And, you know, in closing, I'd just like to say that we have to understand that we can't necessarily just think about the whole. We can't think big. Cities are made up of multiple ecosystems, and ecosystems are just made up of human beings, and that's who we are. So the last thing I'm going to say is just to urge you in all of this is to be human. Have the hard conversations, do the healing that needs to be done, have facilitated listening sessions, ask your communities what they need to heal and to move forward. And then you can all move forward together. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. All of you, thank you for your presentations. Under other circumstances, saying that an economist, an epidemiologist, a psychologist, and a racially equitable entrepreneurship city strategist walk into a Zoom might be the start of a joke, but instead it is the basis of some really great thinking for city leaders, for mayors, for city staff. So thank you for that thinking. The first question that I'm going to pose to the group is really for anybody or all of you. And that is, let's say you are sitting with a mayor right now. It's just the two of you one-on-one, and you have enough time to give one or two key pieces of, if I were mayor, here's what I do right now for my constituents and for my cities. What would that advice be? Oh, come on. I'm not going to start. You know,
I would say that it's really important during this time that mayors and economic developers look to their citizens for direction. Some type of strategy or some type of effort that will allow you to listen to entrepreneurs, in particular in this time. Town hall or a listening session to really get to the root of or facilitate a discussion, what they need, and not make assumptions of what can actually make a difference, and make sure that you're including all types of businesses of all sectors. It could be really tempting during this time to really focus on how do we get everybody tech enabled, and how do we really lean into a tech direction. But you have to think about that there are businesses out there that that still need to function. We still need, our economy needs to function. We need restaurants open. We need to equip them to do that. We need retail open. We need to equip them to do that. And if that involves tech enabling programs and education to get people to that level, then that's what we need to do.
Great.
I would build on that. I think it's absolutely essential that you have to have the right people at the table. Don't assume that the answers all exist within the mayoral staff. Get to the local community, the leaders in the community, but also the average citizen. I'm certainly looking at it from particularly from a mental health and psychological well-being point of view. But when you think about entrepreneurs, you're thinking about people who have lives outside of their work as well, who are trying to figure out how to parent during a pandemic, how to ensure their kids are involved with school. So look at the broader place that people are working from and realize that the kinds of solutions we need now and likely will need going forward will be different from what has worked before. So how do you ensure that those business people are able to work while at the same time their kids have education or daycare? How do you fit those things together? Because if parents aren't happy with what's going on with their kids, they're not going to be able to give 100% to their business either. So we've got to be able to look across what a person's life is in order to ensure that they're able to contribute productively and to their best of their ability in their local communities.
So first of all, I want to second everything that Faye and Lynn said. I thought those were great ideas. In my remarks, I talked about making a priority out of preserving existing structures, which is, what many of us have been talking about with our remarks. But I think there also has to be kind of a forward-looking kind of contingency planning aspect to your thinking. So, if you can't preserve these structures, we've already seen some businesses go bankrupt. We may see many more. What are you going to do then? I mean, what are you going to do to kind of allow new businesses to start up to replace them? A lot of people who are unemployed right now are still saying, this is a temporary layoff. I'm going to go back to my original job. But we know a lot of those temporary layoffs are going to become kind of permanent layoffs, and they're going to need new jobs. So what can you do to match those workers with new jobs? Right now there's a moratorium on evictions from rental properties. So we actually haven't seen widespread homelessness come out of this, but that expires at the end of this year. And it's not about forgiving rent. It's actually just about deferring rent. So, we may be in a situation where there's a wave of evictions at the beginning of next year. So are your homeless shelters ready for that? What else can you do to help those families find new housing? So I think some amount of also, I know there's like a ton on your plate right now, but some amount of kind of planning for the future is also important.
And we do have about 15 minutes left. So if folks watching do have questions, please feel free to submit them. We'd love to hear your voice in this conversation.
I will also jump in and say one of the things I think would be crucial for leaders in this time is to ensure that your staffs and your organization have significant racial equity training and knowledge. This is crucial, and it can't be overlooked anymore. And I think everyone needs to be coming at this work from the same lens and the same understanding of the impacts of racial injustice on the economy.
Great, thank you. Benjamin, I have a question for you. In some states, the relationship between large cities and state leadership is fantastic. In some states, it's terrible. And in some states, it's in between. Do you have ideas about how mayors can effectively interact with their state governments to get the data that they need to make decisions moving forward?
You know, I think it really does vary significantly by state. As you said, I am coming from a very rural state with without much for large cities. But even in smaller states like North Dakota, we do see some strong differences between our smaller and our larger communities, and the needs of the larger cities are greater, and I think the capacity for the cities to take a look at the data and respond without as much state intervention is definitely there. So as far as actually getting access to the data and being able to use it, I think just continuing to be persistent with your state health department to really understand what you need. They sometimes, if you just ask for something without as much of an explanation, it may be more difficult. But if you really break down everything about how you're planning on using it, how you're planning to protect the data, protect the privacy and the security of that data, I think you may have better success. But of course, that is going to vary widely by state, unfortunately.
And if you know a guy who knows a guy who knows a lady who knows a lady, they might deliver data to you in a trench coat in a parking garage. In some states, that may be how it works. One thing that I have, I was mayor of Minneapolis during a particularly tumultuous time. I've also been in recovery from alcoholism for 31 years. So I knew going in the value of self-care and taking time. And I had the experience that if I could take care of myself, it meant that I could be there more fully and consistently for my constituents and make more clear-headed decisions. That is all my way of asking, probably Lynn and Faye in particular, for mayors and other leaders who are on the line, do you have thoughts about things that they can do to support themselves in this time? They are part of the human family, as well as being leaders. That is not always recognized, that they are part of the human family as well as leaders, but they need to get to recognize that for themselves. Do you have thoughts for how leaders can effectively take care of themselves and translate those lessons to their constituents?
Yeah, I would say one of the most important things that mayors can do during this time is actually to be vulnerable. I know that is not often said to and of politicians, but I think being able to be honest with your staff and your teams that you're leading for what you're experiencing, how it's impacting you and your family, and how you are showing up can really signal and model some ways that your team can do the same, and that they can support you. Being the one that's expected to have all the answers, it can be a lonely place. And so if you can allow yourself to be vulnerable enough during this time and admit that you are experiencing all the things that everyone else is experiencing. I think that will go a long way.
Then I think it's helpful to think about what has supported you along the way. And if you're not able to engage in the things that have traditionally supported you, how do you do it differently? Engage your staff in that. You know, many of us spend a lot of our time on Zoom these days. Does every call have to be a video conference? Can you take it on a phone and go on a walk and get outdoors and have a little movement in your life? Think about how to just make sure your foundation is strong and support your team in that as well. You can't function if you don't have sleep. You have to ensure you have adequate sleep. Nutrition, hydration, movement, those are kind of the basics of us feeling good. And so think about ways that you can model that for the people you work with and help each other be accountable in that way. Don't be answering emails. I mean, you're mayor, so of course you have things that are crises, right? But when you can figure out how to not be online, do that. That models for your team that it's okay to take a break. It allows them the time and space to recover as well. And then all of you can come back to the table, whether it's a Zoom table or a real table, to think about solutions in a new way. So it's important as a leader to both to be vulnerable, as Faye was saying, but also to model that you're doing things to take care of yourself and rely on people to help you figure out new ways of doing that. Things that maybe you always went to the gym before and that's just not safe in your community. So talk with people about what are creative ways that you can do things differently that still feel restorative. Because if we don't feel restored, we don't have anything else to give to the communities that are so important to us.
And I will add to that, for a lot of mayors, especially, it feels like a risk to take that time and make that effort. And I am a case study of one to tell you that it actually made me more rather than less efficient and more rather than less capable of meeting the demands of the job. We do have a question from the audience from Mayor Lori Wilson in California. Nonprofits play a key role in providing recovery during this time. Is there a way to encourage the start of new nonprofits in our cities to help support recovery?
I would not recommend that, and I will tell you why. There are so many nonprofits that exist right now to serve the needs of communities that are struggling to keep their staffs during this time. And so I think it's important to identify what the needs of the community are and to invest in the organizations that are currently serving those needs so that they can be sustainable. I think a lot of things, what's happening in this time, and that people are thinking about the businesses and making sure they survive, but no one's thinking about the organizations that serve the businesses and/or that serve other human service needs. And we're struggling as well. So how do you invest in those that are already there and equip them to do the work that they have been doing up until this point?
Other thoughts on that score?
I mean, that's a great point, Faye. Build partnerships among the nonprofits that exist. We too often, in my organization, we find overlap in what we're doing. So let's utilize the resources we have even more effectively and try to bring those nonprofits together in ways to help them identify new solutions. I think that would be a great way to work with the existing talent and encourage people to get engaged with what's there, because people have already figured out some of the systems that are needed in order for the nonprofit to function in the local community. But then you'll also have an opportunity to identify if there are some gaps in where these groups can work in different ways, or if something new is needed.
Great. A question for Karen and Benjamin. Both of you have worked in government in various capacities, particularly in policy capacities. And, some of your work, the implications of your work run headlong into the implications of what Lynn and Faye have been talking about in terms of people are under stress right now, people are experiencing trauma right now. It has an impact on their ability to process, perhaps to think at our highest ability, and that's true for all of us. Do you have thoughts about, as you've had to navigate policy and as you've had to work with people to enact policy, do you have thoughts about ways to navigate some of the to communicate, to navigate some of the traumas that people are experiencing and some of the stress that they're under, to think well about the economic recovery in Karen's case, to think well about the public health and social health of people in Benjamin's case.
Well, I guess I'll start. So one thought is the importance of transparency. I mean, when I was doing my presentation, I felt like I was, as usual, being kind of the pessimistic economist, because I had kind of one slide showing a nice recovery, and then I had all these caveats about things that aren't going so well or could go wrong. But I think you're trying to build trust with the community, because this is this is not a problem that government's going to solve alone. This is a problem that we all need to be working together on, the business community, just the broader community of households in your city. And I don't think it serves anybody well if you kind of sugarcoat what's going on. I think people we're in a time of huge uncertainty, but I think there's a sense in which kind of, trying to lay out what that uncertainty is actually brings a feeling of security to people. It doesn't go in the other direction that you make them nervous. I think that if they kind of understand the range of possible outcomes, that's kind of very helpful for people. So I just think it is important to do that trust. I worry, for example, I think a lot about policy at the national level. And as we know, we've seen kind of fiscal stimulus. We've been talking about it, a need for a new phase for weeks and weeks, if not months now. And I think one thing that I keep hearing as to why we haven't done anything is that people are saying, we're gonna wait and see. We've seen this really strong recovery so far, and so let's just wait and see. So I think if you don't so they're kind of under this false impression that maybe this really strong recovery is going to continue, and we just know for just a whole bunch of reasons why it's going to slow down. But I think unless people kind of understand that, they're not going to act on it, and that could just cause longer term damage, because the truth is that businesses, households, many of them have gotten along okay so far, but they're approaching a tipping point. And kind of helping them kind of get through this period without tipping over that tipping point, as opposed to kind of the other kind of path where like a whole bunch of people and businesses get wiped out, I think could make a huge difference to where you are a year from now.
Yeah, I really agree with Karen. One of the points she made about just being open and honest with our communities about what's going on. I think it is really important to just be upfront about the health indicators that we're seeing. Our communities are watching, and they're aware of what's going on. And I think sugarcoating things too much sometimes can cause a loss of trust in what we're doing, and even prevent people from taking the actions that are appropriate at a time when we really need them to be following the guidance and following the guidance of our health units and of our local leadership. I also think it is really important. You may have noticed in my talk here that I looked towards the future a lot. Currently in my state, we're kind of in the Midwest. We're in the area where the virus is at its strongest right now. North Dakota in particular has been seeing very high numbers recently. So I didn't want to talk too much about the negative there, although it is important. I really do want to encourage you to look towards the future, to look towards the things that are coming, and to look towards how we're going to learn from this, how we're going to rebuild from this, and be stronger, how we can really grow our economies and be more equitable moving into that new future.
Great, thank you. Well, we are coming very close to the end of our time. I want to say another thank you to all of you, both for your expertise and your heart that you brought with you today. And I think as a final question, I'm just going to ask in a word or two, what's giving you hope as you look forward? And, you know, as Benjamin was alluding to, what's giving you hope as you look forward? And I can start by saying you all have given me some hope today. So thank you.
I'll kick off by saying I truly am. I'm amazed at how everyone in our communities is showing up for one another in this time, and I believe that we really do have everything we need in our cities to make major systemic change, and that this could be a watershed moment for racial equity in our country. And I just hope we all step forward in it together.
Yeah, exactly what Faye just said. It's been really remarkable watching all of our communities come together. We've had volunteers from local communities, from our colleges, all over our state, coming together to work in contact tracing, to work in providing resources to people who truly need them at times when they may not be able to go out and do the things they usually would to care for themselves. And we've just seen a tremendous amount of support from all over the community as people rebuild together.
Yeah, I think it's so critical for us to try to hang on to hope, right? That things can improve, because we are not going to be able to do the things that we need to do, even if it's tough. I see part of my job as a psychologist is to help people find the hope. So I'm so glad you asked that question. What I find so important and so hopeful is when people connect, even if it's a virtual connection, we realize how much we have in common. We realize the shared values, the shared thing. We all want something good for our kids. We all want to have work that can help us live the lives we want to lead. And we often don't see that connection. We don't always see that connection at the national level. It's in the local communities where we find those connections, and we can build on that. And so I love it that we are working hard to come together in our communities to identify what is of shared value and importance, because it's through that then we can have the hope to try to move forward to create the communities that we really want.
Yeah, building off the other panelists, this is change that we didn't anticipate, and we certainly are not welcoming. But to the extent that things are falling apart and we have to rebuild, I think we have to recognize that it's an opportunity. I mean, the old system wasn't perfect by any means, and I think we just heard a lot of great ideas in this panel for things that should change in the next in version 2.0 of your city. And you should view this not only as like a kind of terrible transition that's going to cause a lot of disruption, but it's part of the dynamism in our economy, that like you can start over with these structures, and you can make them better, and you can make them fairer structures. So seize those opportunities.
Well, thank you all so much. Wherever you are at home, I know the panelists won't be able to hear you or see you, but please give them a rousing huzzah and Zoom applause and applause for their great thinking and sharing so much of themselves with us today. Thank you all very much. We appreciate you. And that is our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for your information, for your wisdom, for your insights. I know I got a lot out of it, so it was very, very well done. Now I'd like to introduce a team member from the National League of Cities. Alejandro Manzanares is the Grants Operations Program Manager for the National League of Cities Center for City Solutions, which is just a long way of saying he's in charge of the money. Before his time at National League of Cities, he worked helping launch the 32nd Global Endeavor Office in San Juan, Puerto Rico, helping local high-growth entrepreneurs in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. I can attest that over the past year, Alejandro has iterated and improved the commitments process to better service the cities and the program's policies and practices featured here today. his single-mindedness on delivering value to all those involved is impressive, but it makes him an entrepreneur in his own right. Alejandro, what should we know?
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for attending the Kauffman Mayor's Conference on Entrepreneurship this year and for taking the steps to becoming a commitment-making city under NLC's City Innovations Ecosystems Program. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alejandro Manzanares, and I'm a program manager, grants operations program manager here at NLC. My goal today is to go over the potential for implementation funding available for those of you who show significant progress towards your commitment outcome completion. As part of your active engagement in the City Innovations Ecosystems Program, you are potentially eligible for implementation funding. The goals of the potential funding include providing catalytic funding to help support commitment, mid-year output, and outcome completion as defined by each of your program experts' commitment. Number two, it's build and support equitable entrepreneurial ecosystems in your city. And three, catalyze and support and reward city leadership around committing to entrepreneurial-led economic development practices. Who is eligible for this potential implementation funding? It is open only to actively engaged commitment-making cities currently in the CIE 2020-2021 program and program experts, if that's applicable. We will open up the potential process late October, early November, with awards being announced mid-January. The grant performance period is 6.5 months from mid-January all the way until the end of July. Award amounts will be up to $15,000 per city. And as I said, we'll run to mid-January. Really quick here as well. Guidelines for the potential implementation down the road. City and program expert has been active throughout the CIE 2020-2021 servicing year. In other words, they've attended the Kauffman Mayor's Conference, other kickoffs, live or recorded. The city has made a public commitment, which I know many of you will do in this conference, and has participated actively on group calls, webinars, and other one-on-one calls. Has completed their initiated activity, and the city is on their way towards accomplishing their mid-year output as defined by your own commitments. That's pretty much it. Expect more from me down the line once the process starts. I wish you all the best. Feel free to reach out, and thank you for all the work that you do.
And thank you, Alejandro. Like he mentioned in his talk there will be more information after the conference, so look for that from him. Now we're going to take a quick break, and then we will work on your specific programs, policies, and practices with the program experts. At that time, our facilitation expert, Jody Engelberg from the Value Web, will describe how the breakout sessions will work and how you can get the most out of it. See you in a few. Thank you.